And what are the things that Biden actually could be doing right now? I mean, maybe, just starting with the race and criminal justice stuff, like what could he be doing right now if he wanted to?
Well, I mean, if we want to start with criminal justice, he did an executive order with a lot of fanfare about ending private prison contracts, federal level. That's great. That's great. Yeah. That's progress. Glad to see it. But with every single one of these executive orders, and I have really done my homework on these because I don't want to be a hater. I really want to give him credit when he deserves credit, like good private prisons at the federal level. That's great. But I really literally feel like every time I dig into one of these things, I end up coming away disappointed because I was set to be like, this is great. This is progress. This is important. And then you dig in and you find out, well, there's only 3 contracts to start with. And it doesn't include immigration detention, which is a more sizable part of the population. So even this, you're like, okay, good. It's better than it was, but it's also not all that it could be. We just had over the summer, obviously, the largest protest movement in the nation's history. And at the federal level, we've seen literally nothing in response to that. I think at the local level, activists have been able to secure quite a number of wins. Actually, I don't want to invisibilize that at all. But at the federal level, we've gotten, Pelosi and co kneeling in kente cloth. And we had the really embarrassing spectacle of going into the critical Senate races in Georgia, it being reported that everyone's going, hey, let's not even say the word police, right? Let's not even go there whatsoever. So we're not even going to talk about considering to do anything on that front. But, it's also, and this is not, I'm not criticizing your framing of this, but it also really annoys me when people equate racial justice just with criminal justice, right? If Biden was serious about racial equity and closing the racial wealth gap, then we would have Medicare for all. If he was serious, then we would cancel student debt. Right? If he was serious, then we would not be like begging for $1,400 when you promised $2,000 immediately. Now it's like $1,400 maybe when we get to it and we're going to keep negotiating it down. No, you would be doing $2,000 a month, every month, at least for the duration of the pandemic, as they've done in places like Canada and other places, and which is not some radical left-wing idea. It's an idea that's supported by an overwhelming majority of the American people. So if you were actually serious about these issues, those are the sort of steps that you would take, all of which, this is not fantasy land, 100% of the things that I just mentioned are 100% within Biden's control. And yet there's no prayer of any of that actually happening. So I think that tells you the seriousness with which he and the Democratic Party establishment in general take the issue.
Yeah, so I think it's right to say that all of the, like, if you care about, equalizing the life outcomes of Americans from different racial backgrounds, then, and if that's not what he means by what he talks about systemic racism, then I literally don't know what it means. But if that's what you care about, then yes, absolutely, all of those issues would be part of it. But even in the narrower way it was often, construed that, that when there was that, kneeling in kente cloth, that was, that was about, policing and, and all of that. That was the context that happened in. And it is an incredibly restrictive way to talk about that. I think that's totally right. But even just, sticking with that, before we get to, the healthcare and, and stimulus checks and all of those other things, this seems like, there is a whole lot more that the president could unilaterally do on this, besides just canceling 3 private prison contracts.
You think? I mean, hey, how about you deschedule marijuana? How about we start there? How about you deschedule some other things while you're at it? I mean, if there's one thing that is central to the system of mass incarceration, which Joe Biden himself helped integrally to construct and certainly knows a thing about, it is the war on drugs. So if you actually want to make changes, if you're actually serious about these things and not doing the kente cloth equivalent, that's where you start, right? That's where you go to. And we haven't heard anything about that so far, Ben.
Yeah, right. And also, besides descheduling marijuana, I mean, like he could, I mean, public federal prisons, he could release anybody he wanted, to release. He has that power
Yeah.
to presidential pardon. And so, there could be mass releases of nonviolent offenders, tomorrow, if he wanted to. Although, why would, I think there's a larger context here, which is why would you think that he wanted to, given that throughout his entire history, pretty much leading up to becoming president, he, certainly the entire time he was in the Senate, he was one of the biggest war on drugs hawks in the Senate. He was pushing for ever more draconian, laws about all of that stuff. And I know that the more sympathetic interpretation of Biden you get, and I mean, it actually says something about how bad the record is that this is the more sympathetic interpretation. Well, he's just an opportunist. He doesn't really believe any of that. That's so he could go either way. It doesn't really matter. He'll just go whichever way.
That's the best possible case. Actually, I mean, I kind of buy the case, to be honest with you. I honestly think he's always tried to find whatever the center of political gravity was in Washington. And the center of political gravity in Washington is always a terrible place to be, right? I mean, that's where wars are started, bad trade deals are passed, and, drug wars are started, and mass incarceration is increased, and these terrible, wrong-headed, tough on crime crap. That's all in the center of political gravity. And that's where he's always tried to sort of situate himself. I mean, going back to some of what we were saying at the beginning about him and Trump and their similarities, I do think very central to his self-conception is this idea that I work across the aisle. I think that's really core. To the extent that he has an ideology, I think that's the thing that you just can't break him of, which is a disaster, because we see the results playing out right now, even after 8 years of seeing that the Republicans have no intent of working with you in good faith on anything, that in fact they've set out to destroy you and your presidency and undermine any potential progress that could inure to your benefit. There's still all this, at least on the surface level, symbolic. We're going to meet with them. We're going to negotiate with them. We're taking their plan seriously on relief, rather than just a really clear-headed, here's what we need, here's what we're going to do, and we're going to put the screws to anyone in our own party who isn't going to go along with us. So, and this is the other thing that, I really think about, this right-wing group that came up of Republicans that came up with their alternative relief plan. I use that word very loosely here. They immediately get an invite to the White House. Well, Ilhan Omar and a lot of other progressives authored a letter saying that, hey, we need to do more. We need to have $2,000 recurring checks. I haven't seen their invite to the White House yet. And I don't actually put that 100% on Biden, because the bottom line is the Republicans and the Manchins of the world are willing to walk away and not vote for the deal. And even in sending this letter, the progressives said up front, look, this isn't going to hold back our support. So they're not really giving him a reason for having to meet with them and having to negotiate on the progressive side of the lever of the ledger. The only people who are really willing to play hardball here are the right wingers. And so that's kind of how you end up. Now, the more charitable interpretation there, which I do want to grant, is people like Ilhan Omar and AOC and Bernie, who I think has played a little bit more hardball at this point than others, they actually care about the result, right? They actually want people to get relief. And so the fact that they have morals and values is kind of weaponized against them, because it's oh, well, you can't stand in the way of this deal, right? People need this help. And they're like, God, people really do need this help. And I really don't want to be the one standing in the way of that deal. And I do believe that they come from that good and moral place, but ultimately their willingness to just sort of send the strongly worded letter without putting any muscle behind it leads to an inferior result for everyone.
Right. And when we talk about that result, this is something you mentioned earlier, but I mean, it's really worth circling and underlining a couple times, that the argument that, during the election, there were literally ads that ran in Georgia with images of $2,000 checks in them. And then after the election, they flipped to saying, oh, what we really meant was $1,400 checks. Because if you think about it, you always know it's going to be a political winner when you start with, if you think about it. That's really like having a $2,000 check, because it adds with the $600 that you already spent in December. And so it's like $2,000.
That's some delicious Democratic messaging right there, isn't it? If you add the 14 with the $600 that you previously may have received, you'll see that it equals up to $2,000. It's like, oh my God, what are you doing right now? And then I have to say, like, I consider myself to be kind of fairly cynical at this point. Like, I didn't expect much from the Biden administration. I still don't expect much from the Biden administration. And yet, when he was so clear in Georgia of like, you will get $2,000 immediately, I actually believed it. I really thought.
Yeah, it seemed like that might be the one thing they do. That, I mean, knowing given with the way the Democrats are, they'll probably be like, yeah, you get a $2,000 check, then nothing for the next 4 years, and they'd tell you should be grateful for the $2,000, but you at least thought they're going to get the $2,000.
Yes, and you know what? People are so beaten down, and the last 4 years have been so terrible, and especially the last year. And God, everyone just like wants to breathe for a minute, that if you did a good job with the vaccine and you just gave people the damn $2,000 you promised, I think you'd have a sky high approval rating. I don't think it would last. I think that ultimately, like, the structural issues that brought us to this place, that brought us Donald Trump, that created skyrocketing inequality, that created all of this anxiety and unrest and turmoil that we're witnessing in society, like, that's not going anywhere anytime soon. But in the short term, I think if you gave people the checks that you promised and you did a good job with vaccines, you'd be set for the midterms, especially with the way that the Republicans are like doing everything they can possibly to self-implode right now. So I just didn't have the creativity or the nihilism to imagine that they'd be like, wait a second, what we really meant was 1,400, number one, and number two, March, April, sometime, and let's talk with the Republicans about maybe it should really be 1,000. Maybe we should means test it more. Like, I genuinely, it genuinely blows my mind, because even a lot of Wall Streeters and the big corporate donors are like, give people their money because we need them to spend it, and we need this economy to like keep going, and our stocks to keep going up and all that stuff. And so it's just kind of mind-boggling to me that they are doing everything they can to reduce the amount that they can get away with sending to the American people. And I do think that they'll pay a massive political price. People were promised $2,000, and you can do lots of other good stuff. And I want to be clear, like, they're planning on some other potentially good stuff. We'll see what the details are when they eventually get it together and get this stuff done. But if on the one really clear thing that you promised, you end up kind of weaseling your way out of, I don't think that's a good look whatsoever.
Yeah, it's definitely not.